My name is Sina Bahram, and I'm the president of Prime Access Consulting, and for this next week, these next few days, the guest co-chair for this year's conference. One of those things that you learned earlier on is if there's an elephant in the room, address it. So some of you might have seen me walking around with a cane. I happen to be blind, so if I ask you some questions during this particular opening remarks or throughout the conference, nodding and raising your hand doesn't really work so well. Verbal responses are great, like yay or yes, that sort of thing. Essentially, you may have noticed, speaking of me being blind, that there's a strong focus on inclusive design and accessibility throughout the program. I was thinking about what to say about this. A lot of you have heard me talk about this subject publicly, and I had a couple of paragraphs put together. It was going to talk about inclusive design and accessibility and how that aligns with the core mission of the museum, and all of that is relevant, and it would have been deep and inspirational because the disabled person said it on stage. And, that would have been great. But it wasn't resonating with me, right? And I think the reason that it wasn't resonating with me was that I was thinking about the audience, right? I was thinking about you guys, and what I came to, the realization was that more so than a community, it's a family, and to me, I really view this particular group of people as a family, and I wanted to just say some things pretty honestly, to the family, and I think that there's two observations I wanted to make on that subject. The first is that I have never had more of a privilege of working with a group of people that are more insightful, deep thinking, brilliant, creative, hardworking, hard drinking, and fun individuals as those that are museum professionals and just members of the GLAM community. It has been just a delight and a real pleasure. But in the interest of that honesty, I think that we can do better when it comes to things like inclusive design and accessibility. And I think that the major takeaway there simply is that we need to stop launching digital projects, websites, apps, that sort of thing, digital interactives, where accessibility and inclusive design is a day two problem. That's really at a high level what it comes down to, is to consider this stuff up front. And we've taken some great steps as a community in this vein. We're going to be hearing about that throughout the conference. There's folks here from the Andy Warhol Museum, Canadian Museum for Human Rights, SF MoMA, all doing great work in accessibility. But I think that if we just keep that consideration at the forefront of our thoughts as new projects come up, there's always going to be that backlog. But as we think about it, as new projects come up, that's the real takeaway from an accessibility point of view. So to that point, I have an engineering background. I always like practical tips. Here's one. On social media, you can describe your photos. So if somebody can't see, for example, you can put descriptions on them. There's some tweets out there on how to do it on the conference hashtag, which, by the way, is MW17, MW17, not MW2017. I totally did not use the wrong hashtag 2 years ago. Those are my thoughts on accessibility, some quick tips, and just my thoughts on inclusive design, speaking frankly about where we can put some emphasis on that as a community going forward. The person, one of my dear friends, Nancy Proctor, my co-chair of this conference, she's been beating that drum for, 10, 15 plus years, long before I ever was on the scene. And so it's really just fantastic to see now that this issue has gone from a, wait, what? To a, oh yeah, we need to be doing that. And so, there's still a lot of room left, but I think we're making a lot of progress in that vein. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That was a test of the nodding. All right. So, if there's anything you want to talk about regarding inclusive design and accessibility, I welcome you to come find me in the hallways. If I don't wave at you, it's not because I hate you, I just didn't see you. And so please, come find me in the different sessions, and we've got a lot of different ways of getting information, more information about inclusive design and accessibility. Now, a couple of just notes that I was really impressed with this year. Museums in the Web is going to be attended, or is being attended, I should say, with representatives from over 355 institutions spanning 24 different countries, which is just really impressive. To the first-timers out there, I spoke of the family concept earlier. You've been adopted. I'm letting you know that now. Welcome. In fact, if we could we have the first-timers stand up if this is your first Museums in the Web? Welcome, guys. This year denotes the most number of first-timers attending, which I think is really fantastic. First-timers, if you have specific questions about Museums in the Web and all the things that are going on, Emily Lytle-Painter and Megan Isep are going to be fantastic resources for you. If they do happen to be here this morning, it's always tricky when you're blind and asking someone in the audience to stand.
What's up, buddy?
Excellent, thank you. Excellent. So please reach out to them. Some of the nicest, kindest people you'll ever meet, and they will hook you up with everything you need to know about making the best of Museums in the Web. Thank you, by the way, to Emily and Megan for running the First-Timers welcome session yesterday at 5 o'clock. Thanks goes to Heather Shelton, who is managing social media, taking over from Valeria Gasparati for Museums in the Web, along with Lene Spruce, who will be, between the two of them, be doing social media and putting the conference on all of the platforms that we love to consume it on. So let's just give them a round of applause. If you want to know more about how Lene does it, she's going to be holding a special how-to session on using digital engagement strategies for storytelling, and that's going to be on a Friday, I believe. So volunteers, this conference runs off of so many volunteers, and our volunteer coordinator is Allison Henney. We have, I think, at last count, over 23 volunteers, which is just fantastic. They are so instrumental in just making things run smoothly and helping with all of the little last-minute things that happen when you're running an event like this. So thank you guys very much. Speaking of volunteers, the largest group of volunteers is the over 127 authors and presenters that make up the Museums in the Web program and the book. So thank you for your participation in just making this community so strong and vibrant. Thank you everybody who helps curate the events and the content itself, the local committee, the program committee, and the GLAMI committee. Speaking of the Glammies, big thanks go out to Stephen Beasley and Jane Alexander, who've been heading up that effort, and Liz Neely, who is continuing to help with the design of those awards. Videos of all, speaking of the Glammies actually, so this used to be the Best of the Web Awards and is now the Glammies to reflect the glam sector, and videos of the showcase finalists are going to be available tonight before the exhibitors' reception. So we are going to get a chance to see some summaries of the different projects that are being judged for that award. For the sponsors and exhibitors, thank you so much for your support. It is not an overstatement to say that this event would be close to impossible without your support. It makes it less expensive for us to attend and for us to hold these types of events. So please make sure to go by the vendor hall and thank them, especially Microsoft, our gold sponsor, our platinum sponsor, Piction, our gold sponsor, and our bronze sponsors, MailChimp, NetX, and Patron. We also have the conference sponsors of the Cleveland Museum of Art, as well as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where last night, if you guys were at the reception, thank you so much for a delightful evening. Let's give our sponsors and everyone around us. As if dozens upon dozens of sessions and everything else was not enough content, we also happen to have a digital art exhibit every year here at MW. And this year it's made up of several art exhibits. The first is the Minnesota Water Bar. So this is a pop-up water bar where you can trade some your stories, your water stories, for a flight of water from different regions around the country. You can add your stories to the Smithsonian's Stories on Main Street project via the new Be Here Stories app. So I would encourage you to check that out. That's going to be in the exhibitors hall. Also in the exhibitors hall is going to be South African artist Simfwe Tuklu, who is going to be inviting us to participate in his AR/VR project, Mambo Kadzi, which is a completely original set of playing cards that exhibits symbols of African culture. For even more fun in the exhibit hall for MWX, for a 3D experience, try out the Tin Pan Time Machine. And those are going to be all part of MWX. When you are in the exhibit hall and you've experienced MWX, there's also going to be an availability at a booth to get signed copies of books from our colleagues. This year we have Holly Witchy, Peter Samus, as well as Mimi Michelson available for signings there, so please make sure to go check that out. Also, you can check out how to get your paper published in Chinese in China at Shanghai University's journal Museums and New Tech. So the information on that will be at the exhibitors hall if you're interested in getting your papers published in Chinese. Speaking of Peter Samus, he's going to be running our closing plenary on Saturday, so I would encourage you guys to join him for that. For those of you who may not have a presentation or may not have an exhibit that's going on right now, there's still a lot of ways to get involved with museums in the web, right? Even right here at the conference. So one way is the communities of practice, right? We've got these communities of practice this year, and it's a great way of continuing the conversation kind of in a working group style throughout the year. We've got the online collections communities of practice, sponsored by Axial, immersive storytelling, sponsored by Mazidia, as well as the accessibility community of practice with multiple sponsors, and I'll be mentoring that one. So I would encourage you guys to check that out, and then it's a great way to just participate throughout the year to keep the conversation going and to make some real actionable progress on these problems that we are facing and dealing with every day. Birds of a Feather is another way. So there's going to be these sign-up boards for both Birds of a Feather and also the clinic, which I'll talk about in a second. And I would encourage you guys to sign up for Birds of a Feather. It's the breakfast on Saturday. You can put down your name and a topic, and then you'll get a table where other folks who are interested in that topic can come sit down, have breakfast, and you guys can talk about that particular topic. The clinic is something that we're pretty excited about this year. This is a way of essentially working on, proposing a problem, spending 15, 30 minutes on that problem, and you can sign up with name, a brief summary of the problem, and then if someone else says, hey, I might have something to contribute to that, I might have some thoughts on that, they can attend at that particular time slot. We'll be making sure to tweet about that as well, so pay attention to the conference hashtag, and also there's a sign-up board just like there is for Birds of a Feather. Kind of like the clinic, but in a little bit of a longer form, is going to be the Inclusive Design Incubator. So I would encourage you that if you have some questions on inclusive design and accessibility, want to brainstorm a problem or a potential project that's coming up, come attend the Inclusive Design Incubator, and we can have an informal discussion, get the thoughts of different people in the room, and I'll be excited to run that particular session. We are delighted to be able to add card transcription this year, which is going to make all the presentations in this room accessible, especially for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also just for purposes of having transcripts for these videos when we put them online, or for having that be associated with the presentation so that they're searchable. a tip, by the way, on making things accessible. When presenting, if you've got images in your slide, it really helps to give a description. It's really great for folks like me who might not be able to see it, but also for some of my friends who might be looking down at their phone or laptop. And so it's a really helpful way of just quickly giving an overview of the visuals that's on your slide. A brief summary is usually all that's necessary. So I would encourage you to do that. If you want some more tips on how to give accessible presentations, there's some resources on the MW website for that. You can reach out to me, Nancy, anyone else with the conference, and we can point you to the right direction on that as well. There's something new we're starting this year. It's called Hashdash. So the basic idea is, on Twitter, there's hashtags. How many people on here are on Twitter? Say aye.
Hi.
Okay. So that's fantastic. And the Hashdash concept is simply that you'll get the conference hashtag, so MW17 dash, and then a couple of letters. And what we've done is we've just made the first letter the day of the week, so T for Thursday, F for Friday, S for Saturday, and then just gone alphabetically after that. And so make sure that when you're in a session to be tweeting with the appropriate hashdash. That way those things can be organized into stories later on. So it's something that we're trying out, and conference chairs will let you know the hashdash tag for the particular session that you're in. You don't have to do it twice, by the way. You don't have to go hashtag MW17 dash whatever and hashtag MW17. Once is plenty enough. Also, make sure, speaking of social media, to share on social media. This is a wonderful amount of people. There's hundreds of people attending excuse me, this year, but there's hundreds or thousands more following along on social media. And so it's fantastic to just see all of the various posts. So I encourage you guys to post pictures and videos and recordings and all of those various things on social media to keep the conversation global as well as local. Chairs, one note to you, be good timekeepers, whatever it takes to keep things on time. One of the wonderful things that MW attendees love to do is to session hop, and that's perfectly okay. Just grab a seat in the back and slip out between the sessions. So we're keeping the order the same. If there's an order in the guide, in the program, you know that that's the order that the talks are going to be given. So it's really important to keep the timing for those talks as tight as possible. So now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker as well as our MC for this particular session. So our MC is going to be Adam J. Martin. He's the Chief Digital Officer for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. He's committed to developing inclusive and open communities through secure and scalable, flexible technologies. Before joining the museum, Adam was the Director of Innovation at the Broadcasting Board of Directors, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and he also helped launch the first Media Innovation Lab in collaboration with the Impact Hub, ACCRA. Our keynote speaker, Tim Phillips, is someone whose bio I feel so incredibly nervous about abbreviating, and this is incredibly abbreviated. I really encourage you to read more about the amazing work that Tim and his organization have done. He is a pioneer in the field of conflict resolution and conciliation, co-founder of Beyond Conflict, an internationally recognized global initiative. Beyond Conflict has helped catalyze peace and reconciliation efforts in countries like Northern Ireland, El Salvador, and South Africa, just to name a few. Tim has advised the United Nations, the United States Department of State, the Council of Europe, and many others. He's been a frequent speaker in national and international forums, the Council on International Relations, the Council on Foreign Relations, the United States Congress, and many more. He helped launch and helps serves on the advisory committee for the Club of Madrid, a forum of over 90 previous heads of democratic heads of state. He serves on the boards of trustees of the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, Rose Art Museum, Brandeis, as well as the Museum of Natural History as part of the Smithsonian. So with that, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Tim Phillips, who will be leading us through the next part.
Sina and I
period when he started mentioning my bio, thunderstruck. So I turned to Adam, I said, this is what you get when you lie, or exaggerate. But I want to thank Sina for that generous introduction, for Nancy for inviting me, and my new friend and colleague Amian, and Adam Martin, who will be joining us as well. It's a privilege to be here today. I kind of wish this was starting at noon, so we've had more sleep. But it is a real privilege to be here and to be the keynote speaker. And I guess the first question many of you might have is, how does conflict resolution and reconciliation around the world relate to museums in the United States or around the world on issues of inclusion and diversity? And hopefully, as I talk a little bit about our experience, it will hopefully start to make sense. So, Beyond Conflict is 25 years old. We're based in Boston, which you may recognize from my accent. And we have worked in more than 75 countries around the world. And our approach is based on a very simple but profound notion that people can learn from the experience of others. The simple intuition that launched Beyond Conflict was a recognition that there is shared human experience, that every country will have its own unique characteristics of violence and conflict, but as I often say, at the end of the day, there are no unique conflicts. And so, starting in Eastern Europe in 1991 and 1992, and then really since the end of the Cold War, working in many countries around the world, we have come to see that not only can people learn from the experience of others who have struggled through change and transformation, but there are some profound universal lessons that all these countries share, as well as everybody from every country sitting in this room today. And those lessons really transcend the human experience. And what I found in the work we started with in the early 90s and throughout our 25 years is that, number one, people often think their situation is unique. If you've lived under trauma, if you lived under repression, if you've lived under violence, or if you live in communities here in the United States under chronic stress, poverty, and exclusion, you feel your situation is so unique that nobody can understand what's suffering. And therefore, you can't learn from others, and others can't understand your life. And I have often said, in the work we've done around the world, we're often like a big support group. We bring in people who've been through those challenges and who have struggled and come out the other side. Because we believe and we've seen that it not only is change possible, but seeing others who have struggled to end apartheid on all sides, or bring peace to Northern Ireland, or end the decades-long conflict in El Salvador, or the Balkans, that they have much in common. They know what suffering is like. They know what that set of unique experiences are like. And one of the most profound things I learned in this period of 25 years, and I've heard this from the people who negotiated the end of apartheid, who negotiated the end of conflict in Northern Ireland, is that exclusion is the main driver of conflict. Exclusion. They even tried in the Good Friday Agreement and in the talks to end apartheid to make it just a negotiation between the National Party led by de Klerk or the ANC led by Nelson Mandela. And they spent 2 or 3 years trying to have a negotiation to end a system that impacted millions of people across different tribes, different languages, different ethnicities, and every color under the sun that the apartheid state could quantify. And they came to realize that we couldn't reach peace until we brought everybody into the negotiating table, where they felt included, where they felt they were part of the process, where, whether it was in South Africa or Northern Ireland, leaders said nothing about us without us. And so, as we've gone around the world, because we don't come to the table as an organization, and particularly as Americans, to say, here are the 12 easy steps to get to yes. What we do is we set the table. We often think of ourselves as a curator, speaking of museums. And what we do is we convene and narrate a conversation, not that we decide, but a conversation that people in those countries say, one, we need to figure a way through this. And two, if we curate anything, is to say that we can learn from others. Because in many of these places, people think we can't learn from others. And I think we've all learned in life one hopefully powerful lesson: to know what we don't know. And if we did anything that was a bit of a curation, a bit of a sort of a proactive push, is to give people confidence, yes, you can learn from these others. And so in this 25 years, our work has helped catalyze the field of transitional justice. We helped introduce the Truth Commission concept in South Africa. But the biggest impact that I think I'm most proudest of is to see people change their mindsets. To have what I call a paradigm shift, an emotional shift, a sense that they can begin to humanize the other. And these are profound transitions for people who lived and talked and sat next to people who literally tried to kill them, or put a bomb in their car and blew off their arm and leg if they survived. And so in this 25 years, we've learned some really powerful lessons. And this is across dozens of countries, that you can't impose your will on the other. You can't pick who you talk to or negotiate with. That a process has to be inclusive. And this is not a soundbite. This is real. This is meaningful. And the other thing we learned is not only is the exclusion the main driver of conflict, and I'll get to some insights from behavioral sciences, which confirm a lot of these insights and experience, is that in the process of negotiating the end of apartheid, a lot of the leaders on the National Party came to realize that in the process of their own transformation, that what they were negotiating was not just better terms for their community, but a sense of what does a democratic, true South Africa look like. That it has to be based on equality for all. Now looking back, you can think, of course that makes sense. You know, Nelson Mandela was this great iconic figure, even though they have their troubles today in South Africa. It's a country that did something really heroic. You picture in the early 60s, George Wallace standing on the steps of the Capitol and saying, you know, I've changed my mind. Every person of color, every person who is white in the state of Alabama is equal. And I really believe that. Nobody would ever believe it then or today. But to see some of the African leaders say that over a period of time is because in the process of recognizing what they needed to do to get peace, also gave them a sense of what they were building towards. And since in this work around the world, we are constantly looking for models to show people that change is possible. We recognize it takes time. We're wired for homeostasis as humans, and everybody from the Museum of Sciences know that. But it's possible, and we've seen that. And so in Northern Ireland, we did 25 initiatives over a decade. In the Balkans, about 20 initiatives. In Central America and many other places. And I remember in 1994, when we convened the first gathering in Northern Ireland, in a room this size with about 100 more people. First time in Northern Ireland's history that all the key players to the conference had to work. And what brought them to the table was to hear from the people who just negotiated the end of apartheid, the solid armed peace process, the former guerrilla commander, the former chief negotiator for the right-wing government, and many other countries, including an Israeli and Palestinian who negotiated the private or then public Oslo peace process. And in 1994, people in Northern Ireland were saying, wow, we want to emulate what they achieved in Oslo. And look at that today. So as we keep on looking for models to show people that change is possible, we started looking at behavioral science, particularly brain science. And we formed this partnership with MIT, and now it's broadened to many other universities and labs around the world. And there are some profound insights that have come out of behavioral science. One, that it's more important to focus on how we think rather than what we think. That we are deeply unconscious beings with limited conscious access to our thoughts and behaviors. That we think automatically, we think in groups, and we think in mental models of the world. And what really got me excited about looking into behavioral science is a retired neuroscientist who later went into advertising, so it became quite glib. And he said to me after a course I was teaching at a local university, he said, we are not rational beings with emotions. At our core, speaking as a scientist, we're emotionally based beings who can only think rationally when we feel that our identities are understood and valued. And that led me and my colleagues into a journey saying, well, what is brain science? We knew social psychology. What does brain science and evolutionary biology tell us about this? And what they told us is that, the Enlightenment got it wrong. And most institutions are Enlightenment tradition institutions. The Enlightenment got it wrong. We are not consciously, rationally driven beings where emotions get in the way. We are emotionally, unconsciously based beings where the capacity to fully engage consciously depends on our unconscious states. And since we live by mental models, narratives that we have as much unconsciously as consciously that shape our experience in the world, don't just begin to see how it relates to museums. And so what these scientists tell us is that, and I hope there's nobody here from MIT, but at MIT where we have this core partnership, we're being supported by the Dean of Sciences and the Dean of Humanities. The Dean of Humanities is an incredible African-American woman who used to head the political science department. And the field of political science got its name at MIT so it can be taken seriously at a school of science and technology. And after a conference we did on dehumanization at the MIT Media Lab, where we brought together brilliant scientists, practitioners, leaders, people who could talk about the personal experience of dehumanization, and then another meeting on norms and narratives, she wrote me an email and said, I learned something really profound. She said, we make assumptions in political science and the broader social sciences about what shapes human behavior, and I came to realize we missed two of them. As I'm scrolling down, eager to read this, it says cognition and emotion. And I thought, well, what the hell else is there? We either think or feel. But it shows that in the academy, really just go back to the Enlightenment, which was grounded on what science will show us about what it is to be human. We don't teach people to understand cognition and emotion. And yet in that same university, whether you're teaching evolutionary biology or you're teaching behavioral science, it's all about understanding our evolutionary mammalian development. And so, over the last 2 or 3 years, we live in Boston. We've worked around the world. I came to realize my ability to work around the world was shaped by my own experience growing up in Boston. In a working class family, feeling marginalized, feeling excluded, feeling like I had to shrink on a regular basis. Throughout the world, we do this work. My colleague, Lior, and I were giving a talk at the Asian American Civic Association 2 years ago on this research. Again, we're not scientists. And it was 2 months after Ferguson, and this young African-American woman raised her hand and said, are all white cops racist? And I stood there and I said, there are a lot of racist cops out there who are white, who are African-American, who are Latino, who are Asian-American. But I would venture to say confidently that the majority of police are not racist, but every cop is biased, because every human being is biased. I said, if you go to the Museum of Fine Arts down the street, there are tons of great masterpieces, that's a little brag. If you get in front of a great painting, you get too close, a silent alarm goes off. You stand there looking around and say, where did that come from? That's sort of how bias works in the human brain. And the new head of public safety for the Mayor of Boston, who used to be in charge of gang violence, came up to me and said, I really like the way you answered that question. And when I asked him why, he said, because I didn't feel shamed or stigmatized. We're all this way. And it gives me a sense of, it gives me an entry point, a sense of agency, that I can go and talk to the Boston cops and say, who are feeling overburdened, saying, you know what? We can actually begin to think about how do we engage in this issue. And so as we started talking with the mayor, the top leadership of the Boston Police, and many others, and let me add, as a native of Boston, the thing that disturbed me the most was to hear from the mayor, who didn't know this, that among people of color in the United States, Boston is seen as the most racist city in America. And I went through stages of grief. And I said, well, what the hell are we going to do about this? And as we started looking at this, we saw you have two overburdened communities. You have communities of color and you have the police. If you really want to build an inclusive community, you have to get everybody involved. Which means, how do you get the institutions of power and privilege to think about what inclusion really means. Because until you do that, we're going to continue to have siloed conversations. And communities, either of color, communities of immigrants, LGBT, every community that has felt marginalized will continue to have those siloed conversations. And meanwhile, the people of privilege and power, and many of them are thoughtful progressives, kind of remain clueless about what inclusion really means and what it means to somebody else. So as we started looking at this, we started to think, you know, the only way we're going to make this city any better is to find ways to engage these institutions, public and private, from sports teams to religious, to museums, to colleges, universities, you name it. Get them at the table and get them to open their hearts, not just their minds, to what inclusion really means. And what we came to realize, which is what behavioral science has shown us, is that inclusion is a subjective felt experience. You know it. You talk about diversity, which we know is a very different thing from inclusion. You can create greater diversity, and those people still don't feel included. There's a lot of research shows that institutions that have built greater diversity have a hard time retaining those people. Why? Because they don't feel included. And we're beginning to work with the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, looking at social integration strategies. And it's based on notion of contact theory. Put people together, get to know each other, things start to get better after that. Well, that's a very simplistic view of how humans actually interact with each other. And one of the things we've said there and many other places, if you really want to begin to think about inclusion, understand what it means from a biological point. It's the subjective sense that you belong, and that you feel welcome, that you see yourself, that you're heard, not as you, the curator or the director or the person down the street, but as you see yourself. That's not a stubbornness, that's not out of pride, that's out of biology. That is really profound for us to learn that. And so, because I'm on the board of these institutions, and I chair a cultural engagement committee, you know, I had an inside scene. I started saying, wait a minute. And it's not just the museums, nobody gets this right. Most institutions think of inclusion and diversity, A, as the same thing, B, as a human resource or compliance issue, and don't recognize it's actually a profound sense of not only being and belonging, but I think we have to shift that sort of enlightenment narrative that it's about educating the public about what a civilized, cultured human being in our community thinks looks like naturally. Give them the tools to go to the world. Well, if people don't even feel like they're citizens of it, are you actually serving your purpose? And I would argue that the core purpose of a civic institution is inclusion. Because you're telling narratives. There are many institutions, I heard one yesterday, that when they query their public, they say, do you feel like you belong here? And half or more say no. The neighbor was telling us in our workshop yesterday about the new Museum of African American History at the Smithsonian, which has become this unbelievable temple and place of pilgrimage. Why? Because people feel they are seeing themselves, their history, not as an isolated community alone, but as part of the broader American narrative. And I would say the real challenge is not only to have an institution like that, but every institution should be a place where people go and see themselves. And it doesn't mean just having exhibitions on African American art or Native American art or X, Y, or Z. It's at every level people have a sense I belong. I can see myself here. So we're at a moment as a nation and a global community. Polarization is increasing. We're moving from homogeneous to heterogeneous societies. Behavioral science tells us that, you know, our brains have a bandwidth limit. You know, our brains use 40% of the glucose in our body at any one time. I have such a small brain, I use about 10%. But we use about 40% of our energy. And so evolution shows that we do things so unconsciously because it's actually more efficient. Not because it's good or bad, it's efficient. And so as we transition around the world to deeply heterogeneous societies, also, as every institution here knows, how do you attract people's attention with the advent of technology and social media and all of that? Well, I think one way is to show people that they belong here. You can see yourself here. And I tell my colleagues at the MFA, because we're an encyclopedic museum, the very nature of encyclopedic museums is about diversity, because they collect cultures across time and space. Virtually any community can find themselves represented in a great encyclopedic museum, for example. Museums don't think in that context. They're not trained to think of the diversity as it relates to the community outside the walls. They just think of different cultures of time, and they want to tell a story. And by the way, in a sense, museums are at the end point, not the beginning point, because you hire people who are trained in universities and colleges and other places. So they come with this training and narratives about how we tell stories. This work that we have to do is not driven purely by the desire to make our institutions more inclusive and diverse, which is a top requirement. But it's driven by we need to make our communities more inclusive. Because it is core to resolving the polarization and the increasing conflict we're seeing. This is as much a civic responsibility as it is an institutional responsibility. And I think the good news is that the experience of leaders around the world is really powerful, because they've been there. There's a great person, Albie Sachs from South Africa, who joined the ANC when he was in high school, was imprisoned, spent time with Mandela on Robben Island, was banned, joined the ANC National Executive. 1988, 2 years before Mandela was released from prison, the South African Security Services tried to assassinate him in Maputo and Mozambique. And they planted a bomb in his car. And luckily, a friend happened to see him and wave, and when he opened the car door, it exploded. He blew off his arm, he lost an eye, but he survived. And when the armed wing of the ANC came to him and they said, "Comrade, we will seek revenge," he literally reached over with his remaining arm and said, "No, that's not my revenge." And he wrote a book called The Soft Vengeance of the Freedom Fighter. And he later went back to South Africa, wrote the new Bill of Rights, wrote the new Constitution, and because he loves art, he's brilliant on it, and deserved criticism, he curated with Wayne Kittredge the art of the new court, the Constitutional Court of South Africa. And I've known him and worked with him for over 20 years. And we brought him to Boston. And we took him to Boston Latin School, the oldest school in the United States, embroiled in real racial tension, though they just hired a headmaster who's African American and a graduate of that school. And we took him to meet some of the leadership of the Museum of Fine Arts and others, and people in the community, and people at City Hall. And he woke them up to this notion of what inclusion means, but also a bit incongruous. He said to people, don't be caught up in your victimhood, because it's an entitlement when you fall on your victimhood. Because to be a victim is to say it's not your fault, it's not your responsibility, it's everybody else's. And he said, we came to realize, before Mandela was released from prison, in the national leadership of the African National Congress, that we couldn't hold all the Afrikaner people responsible for the apartheid system. Why? Because they'd be so emotionally overburdened, they wouldn't be trained. We separated the person from the institution. And that's how we got change. And he was saying this to people in Boston, saying, you have to find ways to connect. And this is where behavioral science is so important, because as I said at the outset, what this scientist said to me who had sat in on the conference, at the class, he said, we can't think rationally until we feel our identities are understood and valued. So just to wrap up, and we'll have a Q&A session, we have to, as communities, as citizens, find ways to really make them more inclusive and diverse in meaningful ways that are meaningful to people who feel excluded. Science shows us it's absolutely a necessity. Certainly our lived experiences show that. But a lot of the ways, and not just in the museum world, institutions think of these things are wrong. We'll maybe talk about even notions of culture days. You know, one day for a certain community, 5,000 people show up, is not a recipe for true inclusion. And we know there are real difficulties. Governance, board, others may not see it as a priority. This is generational work. This is not going to happen overnight. But we're privileged to be working with the Baltimore Museum of Art, May 4th. Sorry, down in. If you're in town, you can come. We're bringing leaders from South Africa. We're bringing neuroscientists and others to replicate what we did at MIT. And let me tell you, the impact it had on people who represented power and privilege over 60 institutions in Boston was profound. They described it as a conversion experience, that it hit them in the solar plexus, that they were given the tools to begin to think about what this reality is for others. And so with that, I think I'll wrap it up. I see the signal, and I thank you for your attention, and look forward to your questions. Thank you.